I went back and looked. I actually put together 4 or 5, about 3 articles, kind of combined them into one. I got a lot of comments and quotes. Washington Post, I want to give credit where credit's due. Washington Post, New York Times, National Review, the Washington Examiner, and thehill.com. This is where I kind of put all this information together in Good Morning PD fashion. Evil is something Kavanaugh was called by members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. A threat to the planet is another choicey saying about Brett Kavanaugh. A danger to the lives of American women. Now, when Brett Kavanaugh was introduced as the nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court, several open-minded Democrats chimed in a very conciliatory and bipartisan way. People like Chuck Schumer, who said, because, they're interested in seeing whether this guy is duly qualified, and they're there to give advice and consent, right? I mean, that's what the Senate is supposed to do. Okay, well, I mean, the open-minded Chuck Schumer, who was a Senate Minority Leader, said that Americans should make it clear that they will not tolerate a nominee chosen from President Trump's preordained list. Very open-minded. Because, after all, his job is to advise and consent. So when you advise and consent, you need to go in there with an open mind. I don't know why anybody would think Chuck Schumer had anything other than a complete and total willingness to listen to somebody who may have a judicial philosophy different than he is, but is very qualified and legitimately deserves to be on the Supreme Court. And then you've got Richard Blumenthal of Kentucky. And he swore, his exact words, not mine, I swear the Democrats will use every tool available to stop any Supreme Court nominee that this illegitimate president brings forth. Another example of open-mindedness and a willingness to put the country first and not be as partisan about Supreme Court issues as we have in the past. Remember Lindsey said, tell Kagan and Sotomayor I said hello because I voted for him? Well, that's the same open-mindedness that you're seeing from Chuck Schumer. And that's why that I think Flake should have given the benefit of the doubt, because he's dealing with such sincere souls who really have the best interest of the country at heart. Then you've got Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey. You want his exact quote, Rev? It's another open-minded, fair-minded question. He said that he will oppose the nomination the president makes tonight because it represents a corrupt bargain with the far right, big corporations, and Washington's special interest. Another guy who's willing to let Kavanaugh plead his case and the president put forth. That's advise and consent. Corruption and big government and all these things. And then you've got Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono. She is a nut. We better be glad that the Pacific Ocean is between us and her. The more time she spends on that damn island, the safer we as Americans are. She said Judge Brett Kavanaugh has not earned the benefit of the doubt. He has the burden of proof to demonstrate his ability to be independent of Donald Trump and exercise unbiased and independent judgment. These are the people that we believe are going to give, Brett Kavanaugh a fair shake. Connecticut Democrat Chris Murphy attacked Kavanaugh as here's his quote, a true Second Amendment radical, an anti-consumer zealot, and a critic of abortion rights. Not even a close call, as far as I'm concerned. And then you've got Pocahontas. She managed to hold out about a day or two after the announcement, and then she tweeted, Brett Kavanaugh's record as a judge and lawyer is clear, hostile to health care for millions, opposed to the CFPB and corporate accountability, thinks presidents like Trump are above the law, and conservatives are confident that he would overturn Roe v. Wade. I'll be voting no. There's a lady who is perfectly considering advice and consent and what her responsibilities are. Then you've got New York Democrat Senator Kristen Gillibrand. And here's her quote, stopping this will take all of us fighting as hard as we can. And then we got Spartacus, eternal showman Cory Booker, tweeted out, the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court is alarming, and I strongly oppose his confirmation. Another open-minded, understanding the role of the Senate in this. And then you got Sherrod Brown, you got Ben Cardin, you got Chris Coons, you got Dick Durbin, Martin Heinrich, Tim Kaine, Patrick Leahy, Bob Menendez, Mark Warner, Sheldon Whitehouse, Uncle Bernie, Tammy Baldwin, Debbie Stabenow. All of those have already gone on the record that before the hearings ever began, before the Senate Judiciary Committee ever started down the road of, finding out what this person's story and narrative and judicial philosophy. It really doesn't matter what his judicial philosophy is. Let me say that again. It really doesn't matter. It's not your job to find out if Judge Kavanaugh is a good or bad piece of legislation. You have a very defined responsibility in this picking of a Supreme Court justice, and that is to advise and consent. Well, I mean, you've heard how many of these people. Now, I find this very interesting because I went back and found this article in the Washington Post. The day after Trump made the announcement, the Democratic members of the Senate Judiciary Committee gathered on the steps of the Supreme Court to publicly criticize Kavanaugh, focused especially on the possibility that he might vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, these are the same senators, the very same senators who in this past week's hearings insisted that only an FBI investigation will make them comfortable with allowing Kavanaugh's nomination to proceed. That's why what Flake did makes no sense to me. That's why Susan Collins holding out makes no sense to me. That's why Lisa Murkowski holding out makes no sense to me. I understand they have that right. They are entitled to that. They have a prerogative to do what they choose to do. But what do you think's going to change? I mean, the FBI is going to come back and say, look, he said, she said. We don't have any more evidence today than we had when we did the 6 other background checks on this person. Here's the evidence. Here's the information. And you can rest assured these same people who made their minds up to begin with will make their minds up again. They're not going to support this nominee. And it's not about qualified. It's not about advise and consent. This is simply the fact that they know how critically important replacing Judge Kennedy is in the U.S. Supreme Court, and they know firsthand that the only way they can advance some form of their radical leftist agenda is judicial activism. And judicial activism normally ends up at the doorsteps of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court will deal with the constitutionality or not of Roe v. Wade. You want to really go back and see what has deeply divided America? I read an article, a pretty long article, extensive article, a couple of days ago about Roe v. Wade. And it's not the question, but it is the fundamental question of pro-choice and, pro-life. And, I mean, it's really abortion rights. I mean, it's not pro-choice. I mean, the Democrats in America today want as many abortions to be available to as many women in America as possible. I mean, that's I don't get that. I find that disturbing. I find that disgusting. But today's Democrat Party wants to advance an agenda that allows for a 15-year-old girl to not tell her mama that she's pregnant, to go off to some clinic somewhere and get a government-funded abortion in whatever trimester she chooses. That's kind of where the Democrats are. Somebody call me and tell me I'm wrong. But in essence, that's where they are. And I have gone on the record. I am not condemning anyone who has ever had to make that very, very complicated and difficult decision. That's a little bit like, don't talk about that man until you walk a mile in his shoes. Living gets incredibly messy. I am so aware of that, it's unbelievable. I have been in the mess and muck many times in my life where my better judgment did not prevail. So I'm not saying that I don't understand how anybody could do that. I certainly understand how somebody could get themselves to a place where they believe that's the best option. It's called humanity. It's called the frailty of man and woman. I get that. I clearly understand that. What I'm arguing is, how can a political party undermine the Constitution to get an outcome that allows for the advancing and celebrating of government-funded abortions? That's bizarre to me. I mean, disturbing is the only word I can come up with. I mean, that's really disturbing that there's one political party in America today who believes the more abortions we have, or the more abortions we make available to anybody who chooses to do that, the better off we are. And for the life of me, I don't understand that. But I went back and read an article, and there's a very smart political observer who believes that if you go back and start backing up and finding out where we became this deeply divided nation, he believes it had a lot to do with Roe v. Wade. I mean, he believes that abortion is such a powerful issue. It's human life. I mean, it's the greatest blessing from God, who is the giver of life, if you believe what I believe. I know there's some out there that don't, but I believe God gives life. And human beings through the political process have figured out a way to undermine and exterminate human life at whatever point they deem appropriate. And you got one party who I think struggles with it. I'd be a member of that party. I think we struggle with that. I think we struggle with the complicated nature of that issue and the fact that life gets messy, that living gets messy, that people very often get themselves in compromised positions. And I understand that. And I think that is a very appropriate place to stand. I go back to Giuliani, Rev. Giuliani stood in my home in Evergreen, South Carolina, when he was running for president against John McCain in the Republican primary. And I had a friend there who went to Bob Jones University and is a very pro-life sort of person. Staunchly. There is no budging. There is no middle ground. This is what this is, and here's where you've got to stand to be morally right. That's his opinion. And he asked Giuliani about it. When he raised his hand, I know the guy, and he's my friend. He's a good friend of mine. And he raises his hand. I'm going, this ain't going to be good. This ain't going to turn out real good. And he says, Mayor, you are in what a lot of people perceive to be the buckle of the Bible Belt. You have a very different stance than a lot of us have on abortion. Do you care to explain yourself? And Giuliani said, I am a practicing Catholic. I believe that abortion is morally reprehensible. I just don't know that it's something government should intervene in. I believe it's a decision, a very conscious decision that a woman needs to make with her creator and her medical provider. And I think that's a legitimate place to stand. I think you can believe that abortion is morally reprehensible and not believe the government should mandate or dictate X, Y, or Z. I think that is a very reasonable place to stand. I understand those that are against abortion under any circumstance. Incest, life of the mother, life of the child. I understand that. I understand how some would say, well, God's the giver of life and God don't make mistakes. And if you exterminate that life, that's sin. I get that. I am so understanding of that. It's ridiculous. But I don't get the other side. I don't get how you can. I think there's a very fair and legitimate debate to have about the complications of that, Reb. I just don't understand how you can get to the place where you believe the government should help you do it. And then we have celebrations about it. We have ladies who have said, I've been liberated. I don't have to tell my parents anymore. I don't have to pay for it anymore. I don't have to go in the alley with clothes hangers and all these sorts of things. That we're taking taxpayer dollars. We're taking taxpayer dollars, and we're allowing for people to make this very conscientious decision, and we celebrate it. That's disturbing to me. That's deeply disturbing. And if you want to look at a lot of the energy and a lot of the motivation in opposition to Brett Kavanaugh, it is because they believe Kennedy was a very moderate mind on abortion. And a lot of the argument against Roe v. Wade is not whether or not a woman should have an abortion. It's not the court's job to decide the morality of that. It's the court's job to decide the legality of that. And a lot of constitutionalists, Scalia wrote so much about it, and it's hard to understand if you're a layperson like I. But Scalia wrote how incredibly unconstitutional Roe v. Wade was determined, and the inconsistencies in making that ruling. And I think the liberals have always known, the liberal legal academic, I think they've always known the fallacies of that ruling and the deep flaws in the constitutionality of what was allowed to go on. And when you look at Kavanaugh, you see somebody who is a Catholic, who is, by all accounts, staunchly Republican, and by most accounts, he's a constitutionalist. And I think that is the emotion on the left, that they're afraid this guy comes. There is a revisiting of Roe v. Wade. There's got to be some court case introduced that ends up at the Supreme Court, and the ruling is made, and next thing you know, we've got a whole different perspective on abortion in America. And once again, I understand the imperfections of living. I get that. I understand trying to work through the mud and muck of life. We all do that. I do it in my way. Others do it in their way. I just, for the life of me, don't understand why a political party would be so opposed to somebody that they see as a threat to a ruling that allows for one of our political parties to politicize and to celebrate. That's the disturbing part to me. It's not whether you should or not. It's that you should, and we celebrate. Hey, we got $150 billion approved in the federal government to allow these 15 and 16 and 18-year-old girls to have abortions. They're not going to have to pay for it. Let's have a big celebration and a vote drive on that. Wow. I mean, I just don't want to be a part of a party. I mean, I don't. I'll listen to the other side as it relates to the debate about the living is messy. I think that is a most legitimate debate to have. But I tell you, when you get that far to the left and you believe that acquiring funding to the amount that allows for so many X number of people to have this, and you celebrate it, that's just something I absolutely don't want to be a part of.